Okay, in this video, what we're going to do is start looking at different situations that the firm might find itself in and examine how the firm might behave. So we start off and we have our firm, and our firm has a set of cost curves drawn a little wobbly, but we've got our average total cost curve. We've got our average variable cost curve. The vertical distance between them, that's average fixed cost. And since average fixed cost gets smaller as output increases, then we find that the vertical distance between average total and average variable gets smaller and smaller and smaller. The two converge but never quite hit. And then we've got the marginal cost curve. Marginal cost curve shows the extra cost of producing the extra unit. So if I drop down here and this number right here were 30, it would mean the extra cost of producing 30 instead of 29 units would be, and then we'd go up to the marginal cost curve, and then when we hit it, we'd go right over to the side, and then that would be whatever number this was. That would be the extra cost you would have from producing 30 instead of 29. So the marginal cost curve is the extra cost curve from producing one more unit of output. And it has to go through the low point of the averages, because remember, if the marginal is less than the average, it pulls the average down. If the marginal is greater than the average, it pulls the average up. And in this range, the marginal is above the average variable, so it pulls average variable up, but it's still below average total, and so it pulls average total down. Okay, so here we've got our firm, and they've decided that, they looked at their long run average cost curve, and they looked at the quantity of output that they're likely to be able to sell and so on. And it's perfect competition, so they'll be a relatively small company and small firm. And so this is they've got a plant size they've locked in, and this is their set of short run cost curves. Now, the issue is, so what's the price going to be? And so out here then, in the market, we're going to have a demand curve, and we'll have a supply curve. So this is demand and supply. Now I intentionally drew it so that, this is going to be closer than I want it to be, and I'll change it if it doesn't work out. I intentionally drew it so that this equilibrium, so our equilibrium price here's our equilibrium price, so that our equilibrium price, that's our price, is going to be less than the average variable cost low point. So here's our average variable cost low point right there. There's, make this draw. So that's our average variable cost low point. And I wanted to draw this so that it would be below. It's going to be close. It's going to be closer than I had meant it to be. I'm trying to do this with a straight edge. So I'm going to draw it and try to bring it across. Okay. Really close. But, okay, so I've drawn this so that the price is set out in the market. Here's our price. Maybe get a little darker color. Okay, so here's our price. Remember now this is our demand curve. It's our price line. It's our average revenue line. And it's our marginal revenue line. Okay? And then here's the price. The rule that the firm follows is that the firm would produce all those units for which the extra revenue that it would receive, the marginal revenue, so that's this price line, it should produce any unit where the marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost. So as long as the extra revenue is greater than the extra cost, it should be produced. If the extra cost is greater than the extra revenue, then the firm shouldn't produce it. Why would it want to have extra costs that were in excess of the extra revenue? So let's say this is the 50th unit, and let's say the price is 20. And let's say the marginal cost is 30. Why would you want to spend 30 to make something that you were only going to be able to sell for 20? You wouldn't. So the firm would stop at that intersection. That's the rule. That's our basic rule. Our basic rule is to expand up to the point where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. It's not desirable that they're equal. You wish that marginal revenue were always higher than marginal cost. But when they become equal, because the marginal cost will be increasing, when they become equal, then you stop. So produce all units for which the marginal revenue is greater than the marginal cost. However, there's another condition, and the condition is that the price has to be greater than the average variable cost. And the reason is this. The price is the average revenue. It's the revenue per unit. And the average variable cost is the variable cost per unit. So we can write then, if the average revenue is less than the average variable cost, we can say then that the total revenue is less than the total variable costs. So what would that mean? If price is less than average variable cost, which means that the total revenue received is less than the total variable cost, that means that the firm is not taking in enough money, the money they take in is total revenue, to pay their variable inputs. The cost of the variable inputs is greater than the revenue they're receiving. If you had a little business and your receipts weren't enough to cover your variable costs, then the smart thing to do would be to eliminate the variable costs. And you can eliminate the variable costs simply by producing zero, by shutting down. So if the total revenue is less than the total variable cost, the revenue doesn't cover the cost of the variable inputs, you can eliminate the variable inputs and not produce anything. We call that shutting down. In that case, your revenue will be zero because you're not producing anything, so you have nothing to sell. But your variable costs will also be zero because you're shut down and you don't have any variable inputs. And so that'll just be a 0, 0. This way, if you do produce, your revenue is less than the variable costs, and so you're losing on the variable cost. Never lose on the variable cost. So as an example, during summer school at UW-Eau Claire, courses are offered, but the rule is if there aren't enough students in the class to pay the professor's salary, then they cancel the class. So they say if our revenue from the tuition is less than the variable cost, which would be the professor's salary, then we shut down. We cancel the class. Okay, and so at the beginning, there are all these classes that are listed, and then periodically they say, does it look like they're going to get to enough students to cover the teacher salary? And if not, then they cancel it. And so the ones, like for instance, my summer class, I have 20 in, and so the tuition from those 20 students is more than what I'm being paid, believe me. And so therefore they're going to offer the class. But if there were only 6 students signed up, then the revenue, the tuition from those 6 students wouldn't be enough to pay my salary, and so they wouldn't pay my salary. They would just cancel the class. As a rule of thumb, they use about 12 students. If you don't get 12, then they cancel the class. But that's the idea. Okay, so if the total revenue is less than the total variable costs, which is the same as saying if the price is less than the average variable cost, as measured at the low point, then what should the firm do? Then the firm should shut down. So this is the shutdown case. Okay, and so for any price up to the price that would just touch here, even if it just touches there, then it's a tie, and we call this point right here the shutdown point. So that's the shutdown point. So if the price is this level or less, what should the firm do? The firm should simply shut down, because to operate would be to have total revenue more than total variable costs. Now if they do shut down, they won't have any revenue, they won't have any variable costs. They will have fixed costs, and so they're going to lose whatever their fixed costs are. Okay, so losses will be equal to fixed costs, but they won't be losing anything on the variable input. Okay, so if there's only 5 students for an in-classroom class, well, they're going to lose the cost of having the building, but they don't want to lose anything on the instructor, so they cancel the class. Okay, good. So I think that'll get us through that first case.